Utility, Cable, Telecommunications, and Technology Committee. We are operating virtually still, but I will say this, I'm hoping to get us back into council chambers in early May. So just a quick update on that. But for this Utilities Committee meeting, we will be virtual. So what we will do is we will go ahead and read the entire agenda. Aaron Spears will do that for us. And then after that, we're going to take a 15-minute break. So anyone that wants to submit any type of public comment, you can do so on our website, which is council.nola.gov. And any of the agenda items that are on for today, feel free to submit your comment, and we'll take a 15-minute break to do so. But first, let's do the reading of the agenda. Aaron, I'll have you do roll call and read the agenda for us.
Sure. Chair Moreno, present. Councilmember Giarrusso, present. Councilmember Banks. Councilmember Glapion. Councilmember Brosette. Councilmember Moreno, we don't yet have a quorum, but we can recertify after the recess.
Yeah, that's fine. And I do want to acknowledge that Councilmember Nguyen, while she's not on the committee, is on the call today as well. Yeah, let's go ahead and still read the agenda and take the break, and we'll establish the quorum after that.
Well, it looks like we have Councilmember Banks.
So Councilmember Banks, now we have a quorum.
Now we have a quorum. Okay, agenda for the Tuesday, March 16th, Utilities, Cable, Telecommunications, and Technology Committee. Item 1, roll call. Item 2, approval of the minutes. October 8th, 2020, November 18th, 2020, December 10th, 2020, February 2nd, 2021, special meeting. Item 3, motion, administrative hearing officers. The committee will consider a motion to reappoint Ozan and Associates and Jeffrey S. Gulen as presiding officers for utility regulatory matters for the year 2021. Item 4, presentation, Entergy New Orleans cybersecurity. In response to recent phone scams targeting E&O customers, the company will present on the status of its cybersecurity measures and ways for customers to protect themselves. Item 5, presentation, Mardi Gras outages. E&O will provide an update on what led to the increased load shed during Winter Storm Uri. Item 6, adjournment. That is the agenda.
All right, let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back at what time then, Aaron? Looks like
10:18, 10:19.
Works for me. Okay.
Thank you. Hey, council members, we're back in about a minute and a half.
Hands on.
All right, Aaron, is it time?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let's go ahead and do roll call once again to establish a quorum, please.
Of course. Chair Moreno, present. Councilmember Glapion, present. Councilmember Jeruso. Councilmember, Councilmember Banks. Councilmember Brosette.
Here.
Councilmember Moreno, we have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Aaron. Appreciate that. First, let's go to agenda item number 2, the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to adopt the minutes?
So moved.
It's been moved by Councilmember Banks. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
It's been seconded by Councilmember Glapion. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hearing no nays, the minutes are approved. The third motion is for our administrative hearing officers. This is the motion to reappoint Ozan and Associates along with Judge Gulen as the presiding officers for utility regulatory matters for the year of 2021. I'll make a motion to adopt. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Brosette. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Hearing no nays, that motion is approved. And now on to agenda item number 4, which is Entergy New Orleans cybersecurity. In response to recent phone scams targeting E&O customers, the company will present on the status of its cybersecurity measures and ways for customers to protect themselves. I want to make a few comments about this particular item. So this item on the agenda, as I mentioned, is a presentation about cybersecurity by Entergy New Orleans. I want to say that this is actually in response to a series by WWL TV investigative reporter David Hammer, which detailed Entergy New Orleans customers being targeted by scammers. The con artists are calling customers with really detailed information about their bills. One person he interviewed, and I don't know if you all have seen this series or not, but it's really intriguing. One person that he interviewed, her name, I'll just call her Miss Perry, was called and they knew that she owed a $200 deposit and also that she owed $85 outstanding on her bill. They demanded payment immediately or they would disconnect her, is what they said. Fortunately, though, even though these scammers had really specific information about her bill, she hung up and called the company. The company then confirmed that she would not be disconnected and that she did have time to pay her bill. So based on these investigative reports, it seems clear that there is a breach somewhere because Mr. Hammer was able to provide additional bills that had similar situations. So there appears to be some type of breach somewhere. So is it the company? I'm not sure. And if it's not the company, then who? Customer information should be protected at the very highest level. Proper steps must be taken to protect this information and determine how it could have been breached. So with that, I will turn it over to the presenters on this particular matter for Entergy. So whoever would like to start, you can begin your presentation. And we did receive your presentation yesterday. So I've got a copy too.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Good morning, Mr. Ellis. Good to have you with us today.
Good to be here today, and thank you for this opportunity. So good morning to you and good morning, council members. I'd like to begin by just providing an opening statement, and then I'll turn it over to the team to address the specific matters. We absolutely appreciate the opportunity to appear before you this morning to address recent cybersecurity inquiries and to review the February 16th MISO emergency event. It's our intent to provide the council with information that will answer outstanding questions and will be helpful in assuaging any concerns about these matters going forward. First, with respect to the question of whether or not E&O's cybersecurity integrity has been compromised or involved in recent scams, we've assembled a team of experts who will provide an overview of Entergy's cybersecurity practices. Entergy takes the security and protection of critical systems and our customers' information very seriously. We maintain a vigorous security program across the entire enterprise, focusing on cyber, physical, and human threats. Our internal assessment into the recent assertion that scammers have somehow accessed customer data through Entergy systems have resulted in no findings that Entergy systems divulged or were the source of the scammers' information. And I think by way of presentation, you will hear that in just a moment. You'll hear more from the team on this matter more specifically. Secondly, regarding the recent emergency event and subsequent load shedding activities, as I mentioned in my March 10 letter, regrettably, this event did result in incremental load being shed within the New Orleans region. However, since the time of that event, we've performed extensive analyses, and we've already taken corrective action to avoid similar occurrences in the future. We've assembled distribution operations leadership who will review our findings and corrective measures undertaken. As always, we welcome your questions and/or feedback, as it's our intent to learn from these events February 16th and to improve our services and our protocols for the customers that we serve. Going forward, we will continue to work collaboratively with this council, CURO, and the council's advisors on these and all other matters, including cooperating with council's independent examination of this emergency event and subsequent load shedding, as well as other periodic updates as appropriate. So thank you again in advance for your time this morning, and we look forward to the discussion. Now I'll turn it over to the team to address the specific matter at hand.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis.
Thank you, David. Good morning, council members, and thank you again for your time this morning. We appreciate it. I'd like to turn our discussion to our first topic on enterprise security. I'd like to introduce our speakers, Mr. Chris Peters, our Vice President and Chief Security Officer, and Ms. Ann Delanella, Vice President of Information Security, to get us started on this topic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Chris. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Becky, and good morning, Chairwoman and Chair members. And Ann and I do appreciate the opportunity to speak about our recent network and cyber assessment with response to the recent articles remaining around customer information being compromised on the Entergy system. I do want to note that several aspects of this investigation may be properly discussed in the confidential cybersecurity docket, as we have used in the past to discuss sensitive security issues, and that we're open to any questions throughout the presentation. Next slide, Becky. So as David alluded to, Madam Chair, Entergy does maintain a robust enterprise-wide cybersecurity program. It's designed to protect our sensitive data in our business and operational networks and protect us against intentional or unintentional cyber, physical, or human threats. Cyber security is a strategic corporate priority for Entergy. We are actively engaged at the federal, state, and local levels on a wide range of cybersecurity issues, and that ranges from working closely with our federal agencies, engagement with our state fusion centers, and security briefings, including public service commissions, the New Orleans Council Advisor Cybersecurity Docket, and CURO. Next slide, please. And as David alluded to, in reference to the complaints filed by Entergy customers regarding the billing scam, there is no indication that Entergy or vendor systems divulged or were the source of the scammers' information. And our assessment included multiple system checks. First, we leveraged our Consolidated Security Operations Center to review the last 6 months of login history for the 2 customers that reported receiving spam calls. We took an additional action to review 9 customers who had reporting being contacted by a scammer during the 6-month period, and that revealed no indicators of compromise, looking at forensics and logs of those accounts. And we also leveraged Entergy's real-time 24/7 continuous security and advanced persistent threat monitoring capabilities, and they did not identify any further threats to our billing systems. Additionally, we reviewed vendors with access to real-time billing data in our credit card payment vendor to ensure that there have been no reported data security incidents involving Entergy in the past 6 months. And Madam Chair, I'll pause there for any questions for Ann and I.
Perfect time to pause, Mr. Peters, because I do have questions. So if you all have found, that apparently nothing may have been compromised, then what is the explanation for these individuals having their very specific billing information in the hands of someone else?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. First, I want to reiterate that we did validate by looking at logs on the customer accounts that we saw no indications of compromise or any malicious or unauthorized activity on those particular accounts, and also, reviewing security events, on the Entergy system more broadly, that there was no compromise, and then also going that extra mile with our vendors. I would like to ask Sanders to provide some information on some of the dialogue we had with the customers around some of those specific conversations with our service representatives.
Good morning, Council Member. Thank you, Mr. Peters.
Hey, Sandra.
Council Member, I can say to you that I have reviewed the transcript of the dialogue between our customer service rep and Ms. Perry, and I can tell you that the information when she called in to our office, the information the scammer had provided her was inconsistent with the information that was in our system. In fact, she did not owe anything at that time, and so the agent successfully informed her that it was a scam call, and we were very pleased that she did not fall victim to that call. And I can tell you the one call that we have where she reported the scam call, the information was definitely inconsistent with what was in our system.
Right. And Sandra, I appreciate, you all straightening everything out for Ms. Perry, but I want to go back to my initial question. And I also want to just commend Sandra, because Sandra is always on top of stuff faster than anyone, that I work with at the company. And I just have to give her credit because she's really fantastic. So I appreciate that, Sandra, but I want to go back to my original question. So my original question is, how are scammers then getting this information on bills when you all are telling me that there's no compromise? Then how can someone's billing information be in the hands of someone else? And I think, Mr. Peters, that's probably a better question for you, being the IT expert.
Right. And maybe would you like to provide some insight on that from your perspective?
She might be on mute. I saw Ann on earlier.
We're checking.
Okay.
There she is. Ann, are you on mute?
Councilmember Moreno, while we're waiting for Ann to appear, I just want to say, just to clarify, based on what I reviewed, that particular scammer did not have that customer's correct information from the Entergy system. Just want to be clear, and Ann can follow up as well. Your question.
Yeah, so what you're
Thank
saying
you.
is that her Entergy bill didn't say that she owed the $200 deposit and $85 outstanding?
Precisely.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
Right.
Gotcha.
Ann may be able to give you the broader question, but I wanted to answer your question specifically to the customers that were in the article. At least the two that I reviewed, the scammers had inconsistent information with what our system showed that was owed by that particular customer. But I'll let Ann answer your broader question.
But Sandra, can you still confirm that the customer owed something to Entergy?
In the case of the one customer, Ms. Perry, that you referred to, at the time she did not.
She did not.
So that's why, exactly, she did
So
not.
she had actually, right, so she had actually paid everything in full.
There was nothing due at the time. And I'm hesitant to talk too much about specific
Sure.
customer information publicly. And so I just want to temper that with that, the customer did not owe anything at the time. It was a very new recent service.
Okay. All right, Ann, you want to weigh in?
Yes, can you all hear me? I think my line was unmuted now. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that question. So as Chris had mentioned earlier, we are able to ascertain within the perimeters of our systems that our systems are secure. So you pose a great question. What happens then with that information when it goes beyond our borders and our perimeters, when it gets into the hands of the customer? It goes through a transmission really of lots of different platforms. And so I can speculate on how the information might have been gained outside of our perimeters, but then it is purely speculation. When you have email involved, when you have other technologies and platforms involved, by the time the customer gets that information, it passes through a lot of technical networks and infrastructure. All along the way, there are possibilities where that information might have been compromised or might have been interfered in order to gain any type of information. As Sandra had mentioned, the scammer did not have the exact information. And so again, speculation on our part, we can absolutely answer the question in regards to our systems and the integrity and security of our systems. Anything beyond that is going to be a much broader scope of discussion in regards to personal information and personal security.
Gotcha. So here's where I get a little bit confused and I get what Sandra was saying, but I'm just kind of getting, jogging my memory from what I saw in the stories, but I believe that like at one point, maybe not like at that moment, but at one point that these scammers were referencing amounts that were specifically owed. But if you're saying that you haven't seen compromises with an Entergy or the vendors, are you saying that these individuals as people themselves may have been hacked and because of that, somehow their information was compromised?
Again, speculation. I can't answer that directly because I don't have visibility or view into their systems or any of those things. But I can again just answer to our systems, Entergy systems, and the security integrity of our systems. It is there. We have confirmed that our systems have not been compromised and are not the source of any type of data the scammer may have, alluded to or said that they had.
So when you all have talked to these individuals, and I think you said you had it looks like in the presentation, 9 customers, and then obviously Sandra said that there was direct contact with Ms. Perry, who was part of the story. Did you all, tell them about the possibility that maybe they have been hacked or as individuals? I mean, what did you all let them know if you're seeing no compromise within your systems or your vendors, then what advice, if any, did you give to the individuals to let them know that maybe they have been compromised? I'm just trying to, first, I'm trying to get to the bottom as to like what really is happening. And then number two, I'm trying to, protect those individuals whose information has been compromised. So I'm just kind of actually trying to gauge you all on what you all have told them and what direction we go in now.
Yes, we provide actually significant information to our customers in regards to what they can do to protect themselves against scams, what they can do to protect themselves if they find themselves in any type of identity, type of fraud issue. Because it is speculative, again, I can only answer to what is within Entergy's, perimeters and borders in our systems. It's a challenging position to be in, to tell anyone that they have been compromised. I would suggest, that customers follow the recommendations that we have in regards to, protecting themselves from scams, in regards to protecting their identity on the internet, which is, as ridden with various threats. So that's the advice that I would give our customers who are concerned about any of their information or their identity. We have many resources that we point them to that can give them additional guidance if they believe that is the situation.
Gotcha.
And Madam Chair, I'd like to add, I think if I'm correct, and Sandra, please, correct me if I'm wrong, based on the transcripts on these conversations, we were firm with those two customers that the scammers had the wrong information about their balances and that they were indeed, the victim of a possible scam attempt. So we did communicate that with those two particular customers cited in the news story.
Yeah, I think Mr. Peters, I think you're right that, that maybe on their current balances, the numbers were incorrect. But from what I remember, I thought that the stories actually had the specific bills that at one time, maybe not now, but at one time, the numbers that these scammers cited were correct. But let me ask you another specific question, Mr. Peters. How can you assure the public that these third-party vendors were not compromised? Because that's also been, something that's been mentioned that, look, maybe it wasn't Entergy New Orleans, and I'm taking you right through your presentation here. I see. Maybe it wasn't Entergy New Orleans. Right. You're welcome. Sure. But maybe it was, these third-party vendors who may be used to provide, the online bill payments or to do some type of collections. How do you know for sure that these third parties you contracted with weren't compromised?
Yeah. So thank you for that question. Third-party risk it's an important issue for us. It's an important issue for the industry. And just recently, if you look at what happened with SolarWinds and Microsoft, vendor risk is a real and present issue, with a number of companies. And that's why we have put together a comprehensive risk program. And there are a couple of different components to that I want to share with the council and to our customers to provide assurance that this is a risk that we manage actively on a routine basis. And it starts with a maturity assessment on vendors that may store or transmit sensitive customer data. So that initial assessment includes, vendor work scope review. We do a vendor internal controls assessment. We use third-party tools to assess that vendor security posture before we even sign that contract. So we vet those vendors that may, access or transmit our customer data. Additionally, we have very robust vendor agreements. And in those agreements, there's an obligation of confidentiality for protecting customer data. There's specific cybersecurity requirements, including breach notification. So that's another control that we have. And then thirdly, our active monitoring of our vendors. We leverage threat intelligence and risk platforms to assess those vendors on an ongoing basis. So if they do have a breach that maybe has not been reported to us directly, or maybe it's been out in the public, we will get an alert and we're able to take action and work with those vendors on that situation. So we're constantly monitoring threats and vulnerabilities on our vendors. Additionally, we have information sharing relationships with Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, and the state fusion centers, which provide a lot of intelligence on vendors as well that may have been compromised or pose a risk to the system. So this is a robust and comprehensive program because we leverage their capabilities, and that relationship's important to us to, process bill payments or store our customer data. So it's a very robust and mature part of our security program at Entergy.
Gotcha.
Madam
Go ahead. I was just going to say, does any council member have any questions? Go ahead, Council Member Jeruso.
Thank you. As part of that, sounds extremely robust. Can you just give us, without the detail of who the vendor is, were Entergy or the vendor caught an issue? So that way, whether it's the testing, the auditing, the security device, somebody says, here's a red flag that we need to circle the wagons on.
So your question was, if we see a red flag, we would take some kind of specific action, council member?
Yes.
Yes. So any kind of flag or direct communication with the vendor, if we see an alert, we would take action. We would spin up an incident response team and look and see if there's any type of exposure, any disclosure statements we would have to make, and we would look at it very thoroughly and ensure that there's no exposure from an Entergy standpoint or a customer. And to date, we have had no issues around third-party data leak or breach that's impacted our customers.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council members? All right, I don't hear any questions. Hey, Clint, are you on? Is Mr. Vince on with us?
Yes, council member.
Hey, Clint. So I know you've been listening to this presentation. I'd like for our team of advisors, along with our utility regulatory officer, Ms. Spears, to review the overall vendor risk program, vendor agreements, and overall vendor risk monitoring. I know that a lot of this information is, security sensitive, but I would like for you all to do a thorough review to make sure that everything's being done on these third parties to protect customer information. Can you do that for us, Clint?
We will do that, Chair Moreno. The council wisely set up a docket for confidential information around security for the reasons that you just specified. We had an initial meeting on Friday with Entergy officials to set this up, and we'll follow your direction and report back to you.
Thank you, Clint. Appreciate it. Aaron, any public comment on this particular matter?
Yes, ma'am. We have one comment.
Okay.
From Monique Harden with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Monique is the Assistant Director of Law and Policy Community Engagement Program Manager at the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Entergy is begging for an independent management audit. Entergy's failed cybersecurity is the latest fiasco in a cascade of Entergy failures. Local news reports detail that criminals have scammed Entergy customers using their account information. In these reports, Entergy appeared unprepared and without solution. Past meetings of this council committee on other Entergy failures have not produced solutions. We still don't know how Entergy's claim that energy use increased by 41% was calculated to increase bills by 200 and 300%. There has been no explanation as to how a computer used by Entergy costs 4 times more power than needed to be shut off on a freezing Mardi Gras night in mostly Black neighborhoods in New Orleans, and prevented the shutoffs needed outside of New Orleans, where Entergy Louisiana served large industrial customers. Entergy's failures block our city from making needed progress to ramp up energy efficiency, support low-income households, reduce greenhouse gas emissions with renewable energy, and advance equitable climate solutions. The Deep South Center for Environmental Justice joins consumer advocacy, affordable housing, climate, and community-based organizations in calling on council members to require an independent management audit of Entergy that can investigate these failures and recommend corporate-wide improvements. We recommend the council take a look at the independent management audit conducted on Hawaii's utility, which identified $20 million in cost savings and corrective action to improve service. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Erin. And to Ms. Harden's point, I did receive the letter that was sent to all council members from the Alliance for Affordable Energy, signed by many of the different advocates. The letter was, and I already responded back to all of them that yes, I would do a management audit and move forward with that based on their recommendations. So appreciate that suggestion. It's a good one and something that I think could be worthwhile and in the best interest of ratepayers. So thank you, Ms. Harden, for that. And to, of course, Ms. Burke as well, Ms. Logan Atkinson. Okay, so moving on to the next agenda item, which is agenda item number 5. This is the presentation on Mardi Gras outages. And this is ENL will provide an update on what led to the increased load shed during Winter Storm Uri. I'll make a few comments on this before we get started as well. We learned last week that the load shedding event, which was on Mardi Gras night, was actually worse than the surprising 81 megawatts disclosed during our last emergency utilities meeting. It was actually 105 megawatts, which means that New Orleans alone shed half of the load for the entire state, when Entergy was only ordered to shed 26 megawatts from New Orleans. The letter we received from Entergy New Orleans last week stated that incorrect programming and improper load measurement led to the egregious mistake. Overall, this entire event was mired with serious failures of communication, preparation, and training. And without this committee's probing questions, we may have never known about how wrong things went that night. The company also relayed to the council the steps have now been taken to prevent mistakes from happening like this again in the future. So with that, I'll turn it over to our presenters that I see listed on the presentation: Mike Goyne, Ellie Villamontes, John Hawkins Jr., and Ms. Sandra Diggs-Miller. Whoever wants to start can get started.
Excuse me, Councilmember, if I could just add one additional person. Sure. I did want to introduce Mr. Rick Riley is here with us as well. He's our Senior Vice President of Distribution Operations and Asset Management. He is available if necessary. So I just wanted to make sure you are aware.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I ask a front-end question before we get into the specifics?
Sure, go ahead, Councilmember Druso.
Thank you. I guess to the team, one of the things I think a lot of people are concerned about is what happened in Texas, in particular that the equipment isn't weatherized, and obviously deregulation is a part of that. There are people who are not watching what happened. Can you talk a little bit about the weatherization of Entergy's equipment here, both for ELL and ENO? Because I think aside from sort of what specifically happened, the public should know about how everything is weatherized, just to make sure that there's protection in the future in case there is and likely will be another cold weather event like this.
Mr. Jewers, I'll try to cover that as well in my part of it. Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Sorry. My name is Mike Goen. I'm in Entergy's System Planning and Operations Group. My title is Director, Local Balancing Authority. I'm here to provide an overview of the event and to answer any questions that you may have. The Arctic weather pattern experienced in mid-February of this year directed extreme cold weather to the south over several days. Many cold temperatures records were broken, driving winter peak loads close to summer peak levels. Sorry, there we go. All right. As a consequence, all Entergy operating companies were affected by at least one of 5 firm load shed events during the Winter Storm Uri. They ranged in size from 35 megawatts to 800 megawatts. The duration of these events ranged from under 2 hours to over 32 hours, with New Orleans falling at the low end of the time range. The event that the citizens of New Orleans are most concerned interested in was a system-wide load shed event that affected all Entergy operating companies and other neighboring utilities on the evening of Tuesday, February 16th. That was the first Entergy system-wide event that we've experienced as a member of MISO. It's been 20 years since our last one. The total megawatts directed to be curtailed by MISO for the entirety of the South region of MISO, which encompasses Louisiana, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Texas, was 700 megawatts. 538 of the megawatts that was directed to the Entergy LBA, which is my team, and ultimately 448 megawatts to the Entergy operating companies. The duration of the event was about an hour and 40 minutes. This event was related to a capacity shortfall for the entirety of the South region of MISO. MISO was seeking to prevent catastrophic damage to the bulk electric system and was taking steps to make sure that the system situation did not worsen, causing more and longer outages and/or large-scale, long-lasting damage. In the system-wide load shed event, my team gave a directive to interrupt no less than 26 megawatts in the Entergy New Orleans service territory. We also sent out requests to interrupt load in Texas, Mississippi, Arkansas, and other parts of Louisiana. Included in these requests were municipalities and co-ops that are within our local balancing authority areas. Through after-the-fact measurement of the actual amount of load that Councilman Morena just referenced, that was over. We found that we interrupted over 100 megawatts of load in the Entergy New Orleans service territory for a maximum duration of 100 minutes. Ellie and John are also with me. They'll explain to you how this happened and steps are being taken to make sure that effective corrective action is taken. I previously mentioned that a significant contributing cause of the event was insufficient generating capacity to meet the extraordinarily high winter load in the MISO South region. It is important to note, however, that the high level of performance from NOPS and from other units throughout the Entergy fleet in very difficult weather situations prevented more load shed or more widespread events from occurring. While it's good that these operations of these units and the execution of the load shed prevent the impacts of this storm from being worse than they were, it is unfortunate that any load shed events occurred. Customers are dealing with frigid temperatures, and the last thing they want to deal with is inability to power their homes. And Mr. Giros, on your point, yes, we are taking a closer look at, and I mentioned it, we had a lot of units that performed very well, NOPS being one of them. We're taking a closer look at our winterization programs throughout. These temperatures were below anything that was expected. When we were in negative temperatures and 5 degrees and in that range for 4 or 5 days, that's a long time period to sustain that. So additional steps of, wind protection, heaters, all those kinds of things are being looked at as we work through this. But I will reiterate that NOPS being in its location, all those things, it performed extremely well. So that was a unit that I think the city wants to be proud of in the impact.
Thank you, and thank you, Chair Moreno, for as part of the investigation, sort of including what the weatherization will look like too.
And next, I'm going to turn it over to Ellie. He's going to discuss the load shed process at the distribution level. So, Ellie.
Good morning, Chair Moreno and council members. My name is Ellie Villamontes, and I am the Vice President of Distribution Operations for the utility at Entergy. I joined Entergy over a year ago after working nearly 17 years with Florida Power and Light in different capacities. Mike Goyne has already covered the importance of the load shed process and the uniqueness of this event, and I will walk you through the February 16th event as it pertains to the execution of the actual load shed process. This includes an explanation of what occurred here in New Orleans and clear lessons learned that we are committed to addressing. The load shed target, as Mike mentioned, that Entergy intended to shed for New Orleans was 26 megawatts, and we now know that the actual was 105. Overall, nearly 25,000 customers, or 12% of the customer base, was affected. If everything would have worked as planned, the 26 megawatts target for E&O would have affected approximately 7,800 customers, or 4% of the customer base. As Mike mentioned, we understand the inconvenience and frustration this can cause to our customers, and although the load shed was performed in a rare emergency situation to avoid more serious, widespread, and longer duration situation for many more customers, We understand that components of this process did not work as planned, and we have already taken steps to ensure that the issues that cause the incremental load shedding have been addressed, and we're committed to ensuring that they do not happen again. Before I get into the two specific reasons as to why the load was shed during the event or the additional load, it is important to briefly review how the automated load shed system is intended to operate. It is designed to automatically and quickly shed and restore load using the real-time SCADA system. Each year, a review and prioritization is developed, and the feeder circuits identified as candidates for a potential load shed are pre-programmed into the automated system. During an actual event, the operator's role is strictly to enter the megawatts and trigger the automated process, where the system then takes over until the target megawatts is reached. In the next two slides, I will explain the two specific reasons that contributed to the incremental 79 megawatts beyond the target of 26 for New Orleans.
Wait, before you get to those slides, go back to your previous one.
Sure.
Okay, so you have here on your item number 2, feeders identified as load shed candidates are entered into the system prior to load shed events and are reviewed and updated annually. When was the last review?
So the last review took place right after the February 16th event. John Hawkins will be covering the recent changes that have been made. Prior to that is the annual review, Chair Moreno, is typically done in the April timeframe. The last one was performed in April 2020.
In April 2020, okay.
April.
And so in April 2020, you all, take a look at the load shed events, about the system, if there should be a load shed event. And I'm assuming that's when you review that everything should be programmed correctly. Like, explain to me what exactly this review entails.
Sure, yeah. So Chair Moreno, the review is an annual process. It's a cross-functional process that includes individuals from distribution, transmission, our information technology group, and customer service. And it's intended to update the list of feeders that are identified for a potential load shed. And that takes into account any operational changes, as the load profiles of feeders is dynamic in nature, and also accounts for any critical customers that may be either added or removed from the list. Once that list is finalized and we all stack hands on what that list is, the final step is to ensure that it gets into the actual load shed system. Changes that have occurred would make it to the actual system, but that final piece to ensure that the list that was pre-programmed into the automated load shed system and the annual review process, that is where we acknowledge that there is a gap. And it's a data entry, pre-programming gap that affected that specific load package. But I do want to reassure you that we have checked every load package in Entergy and every of its operating companies, and there are no E&O feeders in any of those packages at this time, except the one package that belongs to E&O.
So what you're saying is that you would do these reviews and have these comprehensive, looks at the programs, but then after that was finished, there wasn't really anything changed to the packages?
So changes, individual changes would take place and would make it through the final validation or data entry. But in terms of the, as you stated, is correct. That final step of that validation to ensure that each of the feeders located in each of the load shed pockets in this particular case was not performed to the degree that it should have, and obviously to avoid a situation that we had on February 16th. And that we're committed to making it right.
And I would almost, as we talk about different feeders, and particularly those feeders that impact critical infrastructure like the Sewage and Water Board, and I had some preliminary conversations with Mr. Ellis about this, that there probably need to be even more frequent meetings about what's happening with Sewage and Water Board, to really emphasize the importance of some feeders over others, dealing with that particular utility. Should a turbine go down and now this particular feeder is now incredibly important, or should backup generation go down at the Sewage and Water Board, and now another particular feeder is incredibly important. I think that what does that constant dialogue look like, so that, that this can be updated and changed even more frequently, so that some of our vital infrastructure like the Sewage and Water Board, isn't severely impacted. And that's really not just on Entergy, that's also on the Sewage and Water Board to keep you all updated as well.
And Madam
Yeah,
Chair, can I
Chair
jump
Moreno,
in?
that's a great question.
Can I jump in as well, Chair, to that question? Because I think you're 100% right, but then also I think there has to be flexibility in the planning too. So if it's raining super hard in one part of the city but not somewhere else, then if the load shed is in the part that's raining hard, how do you shift to make sure that the power is getting to where it needs to be? So it's both, I think, what you're saying, identifying the main feeders, but then also what the flexibility looks like too, based on weather events.
Yeah, and Chair Moreno and Council Member, to address both questions, John Hawkins will be specifically speaking to the, and I just realized my video's off. John Hawkins will be addressing the opportunity to work closer with our external stakeholders, Sewage and Water Board included. We're outlining recommendations on how this process can work better from a stakeholder engagement. In terms of the dynamics of the process, Council Member Giarrusso, there is a trade-off in these events, speed is an important factor in terms of making sure that we're protecting the bulk electric system. So we are open to looking at ways to improve these processes, and we're looking to have conversations with peer utilities to understand improvement opportunities. But that is a factor that we have to take into account to make sure that we have the ability to quickly and automatically go through the feeder sequence during one of these emergency events.
Thank you, Mr. Villamontes. You can continue with your presentation.
Madam Vice President, may I please?
Go ahead, Councilmember Banks.
And that old saying about garbage in, garbage out is what keeps ringing in my ears. That if we're having an annual review and the annual review failed to catch the fact that we had items mismarked or mislabeled or whatever the technical term is, I need to have assurances that someone is going to go back from square one and start this whole process over. Because again, the annual review was done in April of 2020. Everything was hunky-dory, but then it turns out that many of these feeders were mislabeled. And then to go down the path that Joe was going on, I do know that global warming is real, climate change is happening. We live in an area where you could have 4 inches of water in one part of the city and it'd be bone dry in the other. So if we have another emergency, I understand the automated system, but there has to be some sort of backstop, because you can't have the automated system turning off something that is absolutely needed, because by the matrix that are programmed into the automation, it could very well be cutting off something that we don't need cut off. Now, I'm not an engineer, but I'm smart enough to know that you have to have a redundant system to make sure that what needs to be off is off, and we certainly should never go through this again. And I want to have an assurance that all of the labels at this point are correct. And again, garbage in, garbage out. So somebody needs to go back and assure us that every single one has been checked and confirmed, and you know when you turn off what you're turning off, you know exactly what you're cutting off, and I need to hear that.
Yeah, Council Member Banks, and that's a great point. And I can assure you here today that we have validated all of the load packages in Entergy and all of its operating companies, all 11 of them, and there are no E&O feeders in any of the load packages except for the one that belongs to E&O. But with that, we're not satisfied with that. We understand the implications of the frustration that it caused our customers during this day, and we have formed, and a cross-functional team is already underway looking at what we can do to make sure that this never happens again, even outside of these issues, in terms of looking for opportunities and best practices and having those conversations with our utility peers. So we've addressed the issues. I can affirm that it has been fixed, and we're looking for improvement opportunities as well.
Why don't you go to your next slide, because I'm going to have some questions on that one.
Okay. Okay. So the next slide, the second reason, which accounted for the 19 of the incremental 79 megawatts, was due to a breaker load measurement issue. Becky, if you could go to the next slide, please. Oh, okay. Must have been a delay.
Wait, go to reason
so like
number
I said,
one. Go back to reason number 1. There you go. So go through these steps. You had a, what was the problem here? This is where the.
So this is what, Chair Moreno, this is exactly the conversation we were just having in terms of the incorrect feeders being part of the ELL package that affected ENO, and the fact that we've made the changes and we're committed to ensure that it doesn't happen again. That's what this issue is about.
And so it says here that they were incorrectly pre-programmed. Who programs these? Is it Entergy New Orleans, or is it Big Entergy? Who programs these?
So we work with our information technology group to ultimately get the final list to get uploaded into the automated load shed system.
And one of the things that I just was kind of thinking in my mind, I get it that you all do these reviews, but did you all do any like simulations or training prior to this on, it's like a fire drill, I mean, or if there's an emergency situation here at City Hall, it's like, let's have a drill on should something happen, what are the steps to take? Did you all do any drills or anything like that?
Yeah, Chair Moreno, that's a great question. We do have drills, and it's outside of the load shed process. It involves our storm preparations and any other events that involves our distribution operation centers, which is involved with the 24/7 operations of the grid. Particularly to the load shed component, our operators are required to be trained in the what we refer to as a communications protocol, and it must be completed prior to any operator working independently. What it entails is that for a load shed event, there's communications happening from the load balancing authority to the transmission control center down to the distribution operation centers. And we need to ensure that that flow of communication is accurate, effective, and efficient. And that training takes place with our operators. We also have monthly refresher training involved with our systems, but that spans beyond just the load shed process. I know Mike can speak to the MISO testing, which is another form of training that is performed as well.
Yeah, and I appreciate you talking about, I was going to say, I appreciate you talking about all the types of training that you all do for hurricanes and things like that. That is fantastic, and I'm happy you all do that. But let's just stick to the load shedding event and training and simulations around just load shedding. And tell me, what type of training was part of this? What type of simulations were done? And then the other piece too that I will then get into is specific protocols. But on the training piece, Mike, if you want to weigh in, that'd be great.
Right. I'll just say that MISO actually does a load shed package training every single month. So they issue to us a directive. It comes to my team, the LBA team, and we send it out to the process goes from us to transmission and then down to distribution. And when we do it, we actually do it as alpha, beta, gamma as the projection, so that there's no confusion that this is not a real event to do that. And then it gets passed down to Ellie's team and he talked about the extra train that they do beyond that as well. But it does start with MISO and running all the way through.
Gotcha. And now, real quick on protocols. I get it that you all have an important job to do when an emergency like this for load shedding takes place, but I also think that top leadership within the company should be alerted when something like this is happening. It is my understanding that the CEO of the company didn't find out about this load shedding event occurring until it had actually occurred. So what is being done to ensure that all the way to the very top, there is an understanding of the emergency that's happening? Because the quicker that you all can communicate with him, the quicker that he can get his comms team out there explaining to the public what's going on, calling the Sewerage and Water Board and dealing with all those pieces. What can be done to make sure that, I know you all are dealing with an emergency, but the person at the very top needs to be informed as well.
Right. This is Mike going, and I'll take that one. I will say that, sorry, we're going masks on and off, so because we're all in this.
Understandable.
Yeah, no problem. When a load shed event occurs, MISO's directive to us is as soon as possible. There's no specific time, it's as soon as possible. And the reason why that's important is you're trying to protect the bulk electric system as quickly as possible. So when we issue our order to transmission down to distribution, and they're supposed to report back to us as quickly as possible, how much actually got load shed. But there's a concern, if not enough gets load shed quickly enough, then MISO may have to take additional steps and make our transmission cut significant bigger amounts and amounts that we don't choose. We talked before about how it's nice to be able to pick on certain feeders and things that don't impact hospitals and nursing homes and those kinds of things. If we're not able to react quick enough, then MISO comes and says, all right, no, that's not good enough. We have to go to, all the way through. And so, but when we do these things, as soon as it goes out, we are notifying David. Like, that is in our protocols, that a message goes out through our messaging system, and it hits, there's about, I don't know, maybe 500 people, 200 to 500, I can't remember exactly, but I know it's a substantial amount of people in the company that get notified immediately. So as soon as the load shed goes out, David gets notified by text, by email, and a phone call as well, letting him know that, hey, this is occurring. And that's part of our protocols. We're going to continue to work, as we talked about, hey, there's things and areas we need to improve upon. We're going to keep working on our communication pieces as well with this.
Hey, Mr. Ellis, so from our conversations that we had is that you didn't get contacted until after the load shed event had already started. So, what can be, so obviously something happened that you didn't get the text alert or something, or in a timely manner. So what can be done here to increase the notification so that you're aware of such a major emergency happening within our area, obviously dealing with the company having to shut off power to people? Because as we've talked about before, Mr. Ellis, at the end of the day, the buck stops with you as the CEO of the company. So I hope that you take seriously that you should be absolutely notified immediately when something like this is occurring.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. And you're absolutely right. We do take this absolutely seriously, and that's why we're reviewing all of our communications protocols as it relates to this and other emergency events. This event was very fast, and it occurred actually right after there was I think a public appeal. And Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. Some minutes later, there was an event called. I happen to have been on not to get into too many details, but I happen to have been on a conference call when I learned that this had taken place. And so you and I chatted about, what I did immediately following. I picked up the phone and started making calls. But you're right, the load shedding, because it was such an emergency event, and we needed to urgently get load off, had started before, I knew that it had actually started. It was underway. It was not complete, but it was underway. That's how fast these events occur. So we are looking at the communications to make sure that, while I'm not I'm not in the critical path in terms of letting me know before these events happen, because again, the objective is to protect the bulk electric system, without which we could have had days or weeks or permanent damage to our bulk electric infrastructure, which New Orleans relies on very heavily. it's important that we have those notices and communication is timely, and then we turn around and get those messages out timely as well on an emergency basis. So we agree with you. We are reviewing those processes. We are reforming our communications around these extreme emergency events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would definitely, take a very close look at those protocols because, David, with you knowing, you can also help with the coordination of making sure that everything is okay with our other critical infrastructure and start coordinating with whether it's Mr. Corbin or whoever else over at Sewage and Water Board to make sure that there aren't any significant issues, which actually is the reason why on that evening, because you and Mr. Corbin got on the phone, that you realized that there was a potential problem and it was mitigated very quickly thanks to both of you all getting on the phone and working together. But that's why I truly believe, and it just seems kind of obvious to me, that notification of the CEO of the company should be paramount when there is a type of emergency situation like this, so that he can take the necessary steps as well to protect ratepayers. I'm going to go into communications a little more later, but let me go back to Mr. Viamontes or Mr. Goines, back to the training and the simulation piece. So I don't know, I'm still trying to figure out why that didn't, at the end of the day, reveal that E&O feeders were included in ELL. I'm still trying to figure out why that was, how that could have been missed if there was reviews and training. I mean, and the measurement piece too, actually.
Yeah, Chair Moreno, it's a great point. The way I would characterize it is more of a process improvement, not so much tied to a gap in training. The two, and you'll see in the next slide that the two issues that drove the incremental load shed is one, the pre-programming data entry component, which is this one, and then the second one is a substation communication hardware and software issue. With that, our post-event standard protocol is to do an assessment, and we will review the load shed process end to end so that if there's any training improvement opportunities, that will be covered as well. I don't know, Mike, if you have anything else to add.
I agree.
So I guess the answer is you're not really sure why it was missed.
It was very specific that there was no validation to ensure that the final list that the cross-functional group had finalized made its way into the automated system. That last and final step, that validation did not occur. That is where the gap is. That's where we acknowledge we need to ensure that validation takes place, has taken place, and will take place in the future.
Was there someone specifically responsible for this validation? Or was no one really assigned to it? How did that fail?
Well, we take ownership as collectively. This is a process that's cross-functional, multifunctional, and one step in the process that wasn't robust enough to ensure it made it all the way to the system accurately for this load package specifically. The way we're approaching it is we're collectively looking at it as lessons learned, as an opportunity to fix it and make sure this doesn't happen again. Chair Moreno.
Councilmember Jerusalem, I saw you pop up and unmute yourself. Did you have something to say too? No,
No,
okay.
not on this. Thank you.
Gotcha.
I'll be back later.
I figured. So was there, but let me go back to was there a simulator? Was there an actual simulation of this ever?
Specifically to the load shed, there is a simulation or a test environment, but the test environment is not the production environment or the actual system that is used during an event. So there is example load packages that are referenced. It doesn't specifically have the ELL downstream of Gypsy. So it's more on the familiarity of executing the program. So when it needs to, the operator is able to pull it up, enter the megawatts needed or the target megawatts, and be able to execute the program itself. So that is something we can certainly take back to make sure that the simulation is tied more to the, actual system versus the simulated environment, but that is what we have in place.
Yeah, I would definitely think you need to improve the simulations, no doubt. It just, I mean, just at the end of the day, it's just kind of mind-boggling that, like, you know, you're doing all of these different things and, you know, nothing caught this. The measurements were wrong, the programming was wrong. It's just, you know, it's just, it's just, I mean, I hate to say it. I mean, it's just a complete failure on y'all's part on this. And I get it that you're admitting it, and I get it that you're changing things, but you know, I mean, definitely the ratepayers were left in the dark and the cold because of mistakes made by the company that, you know, if you all would have taken the necessary steps and followed all the way through, wouldn't have occurred. So, but you can continue on with your presentation under reason 2, which we've kind of a little bit covered on the measurement piece, but go ahead.
Yep, we have. And Chair Murren, I wouldn't characterize it as a complete failure. There were definitely, you know, a series of complex processes and components to go through this system event to protect the bulk electric system. And that is something that I would think, you know, would want to highlight. There was clearly an area in that entire process that we need to get right, and we're committed to do that.
Well, I would say that 79 megawatts of power on one end for a programming issue is a lot. It's actually a big deal. It's a serious mistake. And then an additional 19 megawatts due to a measurement failure is another big mistake. So I would call it a failure on y'all's part. So.
So Chair Moreno, we acknowledge that, and I'll go into the second reason, which accounts for 19 out of the 79 megawatts, which was due to breaker load measurement issue that was found to be isolated within 2 specific E&O substations, Market Street and Avenue C. During actual load shed event, the automated system will cycle through the feeders and will use real-time load measurements to reach the targeted megawatts. For these 2 substations, the measurement issue caused the automated system to undercount the actual load being shed. This resulted in 2 additional feeders, or 4,200 customers, being affected. The investigation found that in one substation, there was a password mismatch between the relay and communication equipment, and in the second one, there was a relay communication port issue. The fixes have been completed, and in addition, a full review of VNO has been completed, and there have been no other issues found on any other substation. So we are confident this was the extent of the issue. As previously stated, this is not sufficient for us, and we have formed a similar cross-functional team of experts to improve the proactive detection of load measurement issues. And I'll pause here to see if there's any questions.
No questions on that one.
Okay. Well, if none, I'll turn it over to Mr. John Hawkins, who will cover the details on the feeder prioritization methodology and provide an update on the Sewerage and Water Board. Thank you.
Thanks, Ellie, and good morning, council members. Here within the distribution organization, we have a process in which we establish the priority categories for the interruption of load during a load shed event. These priority categories are broken into 4 distinct categories ranked from 3 to 0. Category 3, which makes up the largest portion of our load shed plan, consists of mostly residential load, which is prioritized to be shed first. Priority 0 consists of critical customers and by design is prioritized to only be included within a load shed if absolutely necessary. Our intention, by design, is to protect the general health and welfare of the city by preserving power to critical facilities such as hospitals, police fire stations, and those facilities that provide supplies, which again is why priority category 3 includes mostly residential and is designed to be interrupted first. In the determination, there is never a focus on the socioeconomic makeup of a neighborhood, as the determination is strictly based on the load needed to fill the requirements of the plan. Since the last meeting, we haven't been able to identify the criteria that was originally used to determine the sequencing of the breakers inside of the load shed plan. However, I think it's worth noting that the intent is for the interruptions during a load shed event to take place on a rolling basis, so those who were interrupted during the February 16th event would now be at the back with the system resuming at the next feeder on the list. We have also taken this as an opportunity for improvement to review our process in depth with the intent of refining the sequencing of the list with input and collaboration from our external stakeholders and partners. And Becky will be able to provide some insight into that a little later. And I'll pause to see if there are any questions here before transitioning to the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay. Hearing none.
Please, no. John, I'm sorry. I want you to go back over on those categories as to how it's determined who ends up where. And if there is a priority 0, is that just that one entity, or are there residents included in that, or vice versa? Are there priority entities that would happen to be within a neighborhood that may inadvertently be cut off? How does that categorization happen?
Great question, Councilmember Banks. And just as an example, for a hospital that would be a priority 0, if that's not a dedicated feed to that hospital and there are other customers served on that feeder, they wouldn't be shared because they're on that same feeder, which is a priority 0. So that's an example of where residential customers wouldn't be shared because they share that same feeder. And as far as, when the prioritization is taking place, when the team is making that review, they're strictly just looking at the load that's needed to fill the plan. And based on that, that's how they're creating those packages, sir.
And let me go back to the recycling around. I want to be clear that everyone who was turned off in this last incident, they're now at the back of the list if there are any future incidents, correct?
That is correct, sir.
But how long does the list last? If we don't have another one for 20 years, are they still at the back, or this changes annually? How does that work in terms of how long is your exemption?
Now, the list, remember, we do have the annual review process. And the way we're looking at this, sir, is that if there is a change, it would be mostly that they come off the list. If they stay on the list, they will stay in that sequence position that they are now. So if there was another event a year or 2 years from now, it picks up after this point where it stops.
That's why I want to go. How long is that window? Is it a year? Is it 2 years? Is it in perpetuity? How long between events do you keep your space?
Well, the only thing what I could tell you, Councilmember Banks, is that if there is a change to the system, it could change the sequencing. If there's a hospital built and placed on that feeder, those are the type of things that are unknowns where I can't specifically state that right now. So, but it is perpetual, for the most part.
So unless there is a change, I want to be clear, unless there is a change to what actually is being fed, it is perpetual. So those people that were turned off this time, if this doesn't happen for another 10 years, they're still good unless there is some significant change to the feeding system.
That's correct, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide, please. Another outstanding issue from the event was the load of the Sewage and Water Board. We've taken this opportunity to highlight on this map how widely dispersed the load from the Sewage and Water Board is within the city, which does make it impractical for us to exclude all of the Sewage and Water Board load from the load shed list. However, this event has provided additional insight on how important it is to collaborate with our partners at the Sewage and Water Board on what is critical at all times versus the load that is less of a priority during major events. We have already taken steps since our last meeting to engage the Sewage and Water Board and will continue to do so to ensure that we don't put any facilities at risk that could cause harm to the city where feasible. As mentioned during our last meeting, we have removed the Southport feeder that was interrupted during the event and have also removed additional feeders that feed drainage pumps. Again, we will continue to collaborate with the Sewage and Water Board moving forward, as our recent discussions have been very productive.
Joe.
Yeah, I guess, John, the two words that caught my ears were where feasible. And I understand, trust me, I'm a lawyer, so I know you want to disclaim and give caveats, but what does that mean?
The reason I added that where feasible, sir, is because we do have to have 60% of the load available to be curtailed. So that's why it is very critical for us to work with the Sewage and Water Board to understand what their critical and non-critical load is, so we can certainly prioritize that. And that's what those discussions have been focused on, to make sure that we can meet those needs.
And Mr. Hawkins, as part of that discussion, not only for load purposes, is it also location purposes as well? Because I would imagine the water plant and the pump stations would seem to take priority over maybe the central yard. I don't know that, but I'm saying, are they helping Entergy understand their prioritization list, what the load capacity is, and an order in which they would want to see things reduced if it got to that position?
Yes, sir. That's what those discussions have been focused on, understanding, hey, this is what we thought was priority. What do you see as priority? And I think a great point that Madam Chair brought up earlier, we certainly got to stay in sync with the Sewage and Water Board to understand if they make changes at the plant, that we can make adjustments as needed. So these discussions will continue. They're very value added to make sure we get the right things on the list moving forward.
And is there an expectation of a date by which Sewage and Water Board and Entergy will be on the same plane about what the needs are from a load capacity standpoint in terms of their infrastructure, so they're simpatico? And then once that, well, I'd like to know what the date is first, and then secondly, what is the plan for regular check-ins to make sure nothing has changed?
Yeah, these will be ongoing discussions, Councilmember Giroso. And what I can tell you is we've already met multiple times since the event, and then we have an upcoming meeting coming up. It's what I would call an iterative process, to kind of have these discussions, because we're providing them information and they're providing us information, but we are working to resolve, and if there are any updates that are required, have those completed as soon as possible. So we're continuing the dialogue. We're not pushing these meetings out, and we're attending as they're scheduled.
And I guess
Councilmember Giroso,
yes.
I just want to add in, and we're working closely with distribution operations and customer service. Mr. Robert Johnson, as you're very, very familiar with, has helped us set up. We're going to set up monthly communications in addition to what we're doing with the load shed event to continue our conversations with the Sewage and Water Board.
Great. And I guess, go ahead. Sorry.
I'm sorry. Apologies. I just wanted to add, in addition to the Sewage and Water Board, we are looking for opportunities to reach out to other stakeholders, Homeland Security, the city, working more closely with them to make sure that we do have the most current information available and that we capture any changes that are out there.
And I guess as part of this iterative process, the question the chair asked earlier, is Sewage and Water Board also working on what their hurricane preparation plan looks like now that we're getting ready to enter hurricane season?
Councilmember Giroso, I can tell you that we are proactively working with the Sewage and Water Board as a part of our hurricane prep. That is a part of our process as well. So yes, I can answer that question affirmatively.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Councilmember Banks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And John, I just got a text and I want to be clear and get this clarified. Going back to the previous slide that we talked about, even the people that were mistakenly turned off, I get it that we were supposed to drop a certain number and through whatever, we ended up dropping more. Even those people that were mistakenly dropped, they now have an exemption of being dropped in the future. I want that to be clear.
Yeah, yes, sir. That is correct. Yeah, because there were 15 feeders that were interrupted. So if we started a load shed event today, Councilmember Banks, we start at feeder number 16.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Let me just add something to that. There is a possibility that we could have an even more extreme regional emergency. It's unlikely, but it's possible that MISO could call an even more extreme emergency that might affect more load. In that rare event, it may change the way we operate these systems, not from a prioritization standpoint, but they may ask for a wider amount of megawatts to be removed from the system. Again, that is very unlikely, but that is a possibility, Councilmember Banks.
So David, do you have a number? Is it are we good up until 200 or 400, or is it, if they ask for 25, some of these people might get burned again? Where is it that it would likely be at the saturation point that those people would be tagged again? There's got to be a finite number for that.
I think that goes back to something that Mr. Hawkins said earlier about being able to shed 60% of the feeders, and so there is a threshold there. But again, in generally speaking, the sequencing will remain the way he characterized it. But there's a possibility, and that if a larger event is called and it is big enough, it could affect those same customers. I might ask, and again, we're speculating, but we're talking about something that we've not seen, but it's a possibility. And, potentially, Mike, you can, from an LBA standpoint, just validate that.
Yes, and going back to the original question that you had, Councilman Juris, at the beginning, about overall system stuff. When you look at the system right next to us, ERCOT, they actually did have to curtail customers, and they weren't able to cycle them around because the levels were so high. So you could be in an event where you have to curtail, substantially everything you have available. And thankfully, we took a lot of good measures in our system, and MISO did as well, that we did not have that long period that they had.
Hey, Councilmember Banks, so I just would like to restate, so these customers will go to the back. I mean, so we stopped at 15. And I think to David's point, if we had an event that happened this weekend and it was an extended duration event where we got into that rolling period, that's when it could possibly make it back to those customers. Obviously, if we went through the whole list and we started again at number 1. So I just wanted to clarify that.
And then just let me ask one more rookie question. We stopped at 15, we will start at 16. When do you get to the end and start back at 1? Is it 50? Is it 500? When do you get to the end and go back?
Right now, we have 42 feeders in the load shed plan. So once we get to 42 and it's been interrupted, if we haven't reached a target, it would grab the next feeder, which would be number 1 again.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have one more follow-up question now based on the comments from Mr. Ellis and Mr. Goin, which is, what happens if we're hardened the way that we're supposed to be, but MISO is allowing the other people who participate with us to go off the rails? So in other words, they're not weatherized correctly, like ERCOT wasn't. Does Entergy have recourse with MISO, and B, how do we make sure that we're protected as a result of people that we're in a partnership with or a cooperative agreement with?
I'll take this one first, Mr. Ellison. You can add anything to it as well. I will say that through MISO's processes, they're going to be looking at that, the hardening of the entire system throughout. We are a large component of MISO South. And so units that there is an annual capacity auction in MISO. They try to make sure there's sufficient capacity for the entirety of the system, and it's broken up into regions. You're in the one with Texas and Louisiana is in there as well. And they have a set reserve margin that they say you have to be at. If units don't perform at well enough levels, they get dinged. So they're not worth as many megawatts at that point. So that requires that MISO now needs more megawatts in that capacity auction each year. So that's some of the steps that they take for that to happen, to make sure there is sufficient capacity. coming out of this, I can guarantee you there will be closer looks at all resources because a lot of units failed throughout the Southeast and had difficulty in the extreme conditions that we saw to make sure that we are winterizing, and other companies will be doing the same, or else they'll get dinged on megawatts of capacity that they're able to count on.
I'll contrast that because you raised it, not to speak pejoratively about another system operator or RTO, but ERCOT does not have a capacity type program similar to MISO's. They're an energy market, considered an energy market. And someone mentioned earlier that they have retail competition. All of that plays a part in the way they plan around that market. That's very different from the way MISO plans. And then when you think about, you know, where we exist, where MISO exists, I believe it's 15 states and one Canadian province. It's very different from, you know, that 90% of the system within Texas, which is ERCOT, that is not connected to MISO. So you don't deal with seams related issues between MISO and ERCOT. They don't share resources in that regard. So I'm just trying to draw some lines of distinction between the way ERCOT operates versus the way MISO operates for you, council member.
No, I appreciate that. I guess my only point is, assuming that we're prepared correctly for weatherization, I just don't want to make sure we're overburdened because the 14 other states in the Canadian province that are part of MISO aren't doing their job. But what I feel like I'm hearing is MISO is doing a deep dive into that, and that we should have better information on their hardening and weatherization in pretty short term.
I think you heard it right. And yes, we are part of a much bigger system, even the whole Eastern interconnect, you know, that whole side of the country that we can tie into PJM and Southern and other areas. And that's one of the benefits of bigger is better in this situation. That's one of the reasons why we chose to go to MISO.
Thank you.
And Madam Chair, that completed my comments. So now I would be turning it over to Sandra Miller to talk about stakeholder communications.
Your turn, Sandra.
Coming off mute, council member.
Good morning.
So, good morning again, and thank you for this opportunity. So just give me the opportunity just to give you a little bit of background before I delve into these couple of slides. So as with all major weather events, we operate in our system incident command structure. In this structure, we have groups that support the operating companies with internal and external stakeholder communications, and this includes communications to our customers. These groups are the Corporate Communications Group and the Customer Operations Group. I do have on the line with us today Ms. Erica Norman, who is the Public Information Officer in this Incident Command structure, as well as Ms. Tracy Boutte, who heads the Customer Operations Organization in this Incident Command structure. So let me tell you a little bit about what those groups do. The Communications Group assists with communications both externally and internally as required by MISO for this event, as well as administering additional external messaging to reach a larger number of customers, which is included in the public appeals, press releases, and social media. The Customer Operations Organizations assist the OpCos in sending communications to customers who've signed up to receive direct customer messaging, such as text, calls, emails, and also providing information on our View Outage site and webpage. In essence, these groups serve to provide the additional messaging in an effort to make sure we're reaching as many customers as possible through various mediums. And as you all have heard from others, this particular load shed event was impacting all the operating companies at the same time. And as you can imagine, there was a lot of activities and communications going on at once and a short window to execute. And I can tell you, we see opportunities for more end-to-end communications, both internally, to make sure, as you pointed out, that the information flows to the correct individuals, our CEOs on down, as well as more end-to-end communications flows to our customers. As many of you all have noted, communication is so important during this event. So let me say right here and now, as it relates to the communications regarding the actual load shed event that occurred on February 16th, we agree that a press release to all our media outlets and notices to social media should have occurred prior to 8:45 p.m. that night. And we immediately checked and adjusted our internal communications and handoffs to make sure the broader external communications occur much faster in such an event. This is our commitment to our customers and to you. So regarding the communications that did occur, council members, as you can see from the slide here, we did have a lot of communications that were administered through radio advertising, through the media market. We had both Mr. Ellis, I know Mr. Hawkins, myself, we all were a part of the media message and making sure information was going to the customers. We had press releases that were sent to customers as well. We had a robust social media campaign as well. As you can see, we had 200 proactive posts. We were able to reach 4.4 million people, and we had 32,000 customers engaged in discussion regarding this cold weather event. We also posted stories on our Entergy Storm Center page. We had 45,000 visits to that page from our customers. And specific to the communications that occurred on the night of the event regarding our customer outreach, so the Customer Operations Organization sent over 784,000 direct customer communications between February the 11th and February 18th via text, calls, and emails. The message initially alerted the customers to the weather forecast and tips on usage and bill management. However, by February the 14th, we were sending customers messages about conserving energy. And on February the 15th, the day before the actual shed, when the MISO issued the public appeal, a press release on the public appeal was issued and placed on social media by our communications team. We also sent direct customer messaging, strongly requesting customers to limit electricity usage immediately, and stating that temporary interruptions of electric service could occur if reductions were not sufficient. We do recognize that in the future we could use stronger language, warning that using the language load shedding could occur if reductions were not sufficient. Again, we recognize where there are opportunities to improve, and we have checked and adjusted our internal communications with each other so that we can work together as a team to keep the public informed of the impact of an event of this nature. And I'll pause there in case you have any questions of
Thanks,
myself,
Ms. Miller.
Ms. Norman, or Ms. Bouquet.
Sure, and I appreciate your presentation, and I've said this already before. It's really about not the quantity, but really it's about the quality of the communication. And, you know, at the end of the day, on that evening, Mardi Gras night, the communication was a failure. And, you know, the fact that by the time a news release went out, I think there were like 4 minutes left in like the load shedding event. So that's unacceptable. So I highly recommend that, you know, you change up whatever protocols you currently have for news releases. If you're having, you know, to have 10 people have to check a news release during emergency situations, reduce that down to 1. You know, you've got, when there is an emergency, you have to let the people know what is happening. You know, I hate to bring up another utility company, but another power company, you know, 30 minutes after the event, they were already on social media. They had individuals, representatives from the company live on TV talking about what was happening. And still, you know, like I wasn't hearing anything from Entergy, and I certainly didn't see anyone that night on TV talking about it. And then, you know, there was even an advocate story where a spokesperson from Entergy wasn't even available to do the interview with the advocate, or it may not have been the advocate, excuse me. It was actually one of the TV stations in Baton Rouge. So they were citing some of the things that I was saying on my Twitter account to get information as to what was happening with the load shedding. So I would just say that it's about when it matters. During those emergency situations, what are you all going to do differently? Which you've already said you're working to address. What are you going to do differently to make sure that that information gets out there promptly to the people of the city, to the media, social media, text, et cetera? That's when it really counts. I appreciate, you know, all of the volume of information that you were putting out there, and energy conservation and all that's good. I agree with you, Ms. Miller. I don't think that the urgency was really expressed in the notices that had been put out about conserving energy. But, you know, you've already admitted that this was something that did not go right and that you're working on improving this. Any other questions on communications?
I don't have a question, but I do have an observation that I just want to
Go ahead,
share.
Joe.
I've discussed this with Brian and Sandra and Becky, which is I'm encouraging Entergy to attend neighborhood meetings on a more regular basis because we frequently wind up answering the questions that Entergy really knows the answers to. And I'll just say, there were a number of ones I visited this last month, like what happened with the load shedding event? Why did it happen? What was going on? And I'm happy to explain it, but I think Entergy itself and other utilities do a much better job if they attend, they're answering the questions, and they can see people face to face, and you start not only having a dialogue, but you're building a relationship with neighbors in each district.
And Mr. Druso, I can tell you, I'm Councilmember Druso, as you know, that we have been out there in the community numerous times pre-COVID. During COVID, we've done that more so by Zoom, and my teams are in the process, not just in your neighborhood, but across the city, reaching out to neighborhood association presidents so we can see if there's a way for us to be able to touch numerous neighborhood associations at one time. There are many neighborhood associations, and we are a smaller team, but we're going to do everything we can to make sure we're out there in the community and meeting with customers, because that is our goal.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So I know that this was the end of the presentation. I want to bring in Clint Vince again. Clint, the council, as you know, had passed a resolution asking you to investigate this entire event and come back to us with within 45 days with a report on your initial findings. Can you give me an update on how discovery is going? Are you getting everything that you need? Walk me through how much you all have been able to do so far.
Yes, Chair Moreno, we're about midway through our investigation, but we've gotten a tremendous amount of information, and Entergy has been cooperating. Pursuant to the council's direction, we're on a fast track here. We've been requiring them to supply information very quickly. They've been doing that. We've had a number of meetings with not just their lawyers, but their experts as well to zero in on the key issues. I will say that your questioning today and in the last meeting have really focused on what appear to us to be the greatest areas of concern. Communications, why did it take really till nearly the end of the load shed to inform the public of what was happening? That's a serious area of inquiry for us, and we'll be having a lot of recommendations in that regard once we complete our investigation. You've heard the two major breakdowns in load shedding failures, first including the ENO feeders in the Entergy Louisiana system. Why did the simulations not reveal that? What has to be done to correct it? It does appear to us that Entergy has immediately corrected that. We now want to make sure that we double check and fail safe that, and that their simulations going forward will pick up these type of issues. Same thing with load measurement. The other thing we're zeroing in on hard is weatherization. We want to make sure that all of Entergy's units are weatherized, and we will also be pressing MISO generally to do that. And you heard the MISO representative indicate that that is already underway. Mr. Ellis commented on the Texas issues. I'm running several crisis response teams for utility clients in Texas, and I can tell you that there was a systemic failure of the market and a regulatory failure there, which led to dozens of people dying, 4.5 million people in businesses without electricity and heat, and often without water for days. And so we want to make sure that no situation like that ever occurs in New Orleans. Texas was also a weatherization failure. They had plenty of warning to know that they had those problems. We want to make sure that within MISO and within the New Orleans area, that nobody is surprised anymore by extreme cold weather or extreme hot weather. I will say that the council made a tough vote on improving your resilience with the NOPS plant. I'm sure glad you had that plant during this winter storm event. And also it helped us with hot weather as it was supposed to do last summer. And hopefully it will help us with storms, which are almost inevitable to be coming. So we'll be looking at all those issues. We'll have a report back to you in early April if we continue to receive the cooperation we've received to date.
All right, thank you, Clint. Any other comments from other council members?
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Councilmember Brissett.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for convening the meeting. I'd just like to know from Entergy, in anticipation of the bill cycle ahead, and since you all know the breakdowns that have occurred in preparation of the storm in communications, what type of relief are y'all prepared to give?
Councilmember Brissett, thank you for the question. I believe I have Alyssa. Andrew, are you on, Alyssa, to talk a little bit about what we're finding so far on our high bill potential for April, March and April? Oh, I'm on mute. Alyssa. Well, I can tell you this, that is she trying to get on? Excuse me, I'm sorry, we're trying to deal with some technical issues. She's on mute.
There she is.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Great, sorry about that. Yes, from Councilman Brissett, I'm assuming you're talking about April bills and what we're anticipating there. We have a preliminary look at our fuel adjustment clause calculations, and although we have seen increased gas costs associated with the February event, we also have a large credit that will be flowing through the purchase power cost recovery line item that will be largely offsetting the increase in gas, and we're very fortuitous to have that credit flowing through at this time, and ultimately we expect for our typical bill customers using 1,000 kilowatt hours a month, we actually expect them to see a small decrease in bills relative to the March bills. So in terms of mitigation, there's a substantial amount of mitigation that's occurring relative to that refund that was issued in connection with a FERC proceeding, 2 FERC proceedings. And so customers will see relief on bills for April.
And I can add to that point, council members, that we will continue to work on our education for customers, making sure that they have the appropriate information going forward through these months and into the summer months as well.
Councilmember Brissett, we lost you. Are you back? You're on mute, Councilmember Brissett.
Yes, Madam Chair. I lost about a minute. I only heard of refunds for refunds relative to FERC. Was there any relief associated with my question regarding the load shed event?
Councilmember Brissett, there was no specific relief associated with the load shed event. What I was indicating is that we did see higher gas costs for the month of February, and those costs were largely offset by the credit that I referenced. And therefore, customers will they should see a slight decrease in their bills for April. But aside from that, there's no specific credit related to the load shed event.
So you're saying the FERC credit should take care of the gas costs from February. Is that what you're stating?
That's correct. The incremental gas costs. So normally what we see in the fuel adjustment clause, we see gas costs around a $6 million level per month. In this instance, we saw additional costs of approximately $9 million related to the increased cost of gas at the Henry Hub, and also the increased usage associated with the extreme cold. And so in this instance, because we saw that incremental $9 million of cost, we also saw a correlated increase in our fuel adjustment clause. At the same time, though, we are flowing through a credit that was ordered at FERC that we made that is largely offsetting in many cases as it relates to the typical customer using 1,000 kilowatt hours. It is completely offsetting the bill, the gas costs on the bill, such that they should see a reduction in their monthly bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bressett. But to follow up on his point, and I read an article, I believe it was on NOLA.com, and it had mentioned a particular customer that had been charged a late fee. And, you know, as you all know, that the council passed an order suspending any type of late fees. So I just want to get confirmation, and apparently this issue has been fixed with this particular customer, but I want to get confirmation from Entergy that late fees are not being charged to customers based on the council order. Go ahead, Sandra.
Yeah, I can tell you that late fees are not being charged to customers, and we are working with them as they call us. I did too see the same article that you're referring to, and have not had a chance to totally review that entire customer's account. But from everything I was briefly able to look at, almost all late fees in that particular case were waived. But I can tell you that we are proactively waiving late fees for any customers who contact us, and we're working with them on a deferred payment arrangement.
And let me ask you this, because I'm not sure if it's happening or not. Is there also an extension fee? Like if people need more time to pay, or is there some type of additional fee that you all are charging? No?
Absolutely not. Absolutely
okay.
not.
Just making sure. But yes, we also to talk to the customer mentioned in the article, and he also explained to us that that issue had been taken care of. So I appreciate that. Okay. Any other comments, questions from anyone, presenters or council members?
Madam President?
Go ahead.
Please, I wanted to go back to Clint, and I wanted to just get, you mentioned the NOPS plant, Clint, and I want you to just highlight or talk about or illustrate what happened with the NOPS plant during this issue. How did it do? And just go back and let me know how we stand with that.
Councilmember Banks, the NOPS plant was approved by the council to deal with extreme weather events such as polar vortex coming south, as we experienced recently, to deal with hot weather events like we experienced this past summer, to deal with peak load times, peak load usage, and also to deal with weather events. Further, it was brought on to enable the city to move forward much more aggressively with renewables. It's essential to really double down on renewables because we need to deal with the very real issue of climate. And we need to have future generation that is not carbon emitting. But what's happened is you were in a period of time where you were vulnerable. You had eliminated your former Michoud plant, which was a huge local plant. We had no local fast start all-weather generation in New Orleans. And the council, in order to deal with resiliency and these type of issues going forward, approved that plant, and it was online. The plant operated properly as it was supposed to, and it operated at full capacity. In addition, Entergy's other operating units, other generating units, all operated except for one 9 Mile 6 unit that was in a scheduled maintenance period. So your responsibility within New Orleans and within your load was well furnished. What happened here is that MISO had had extreme demand, and they had a reduction in load. And when they order that, they take control of the system and order load shedding. Entergy was not responsible for that call for a load shed. Where their errors occurred was in how they implemented it. But all of the generation that you needed was operating.
So that's an engineering lawyer answer. Did NOPS do what we wanted it to do? Did it function at the level that it was supposed to? Was it a good thing or was it a bad thing?
NOPS absolutely functioned like it was supposed to. It was absolutely a good thing. It provided resiliency when you needed it. And that's what you approved. That's what it was designed for. It really helped this community by having generation available on a fast start basis when other forms of generation were not available, such as you don't have solar as good as renewables are and as important as they are. They're not available when the sun's not shining, and in a winter storm, you needed that plant to be functioning on a fast start basis. Also, unlike many of the plants that failed in Texas, the NOPS plant is called not just a fast start all weather plant, but it's a black start plant, which means if all electricity to that plant fails, the plant can start on its own. What you saw in Texas was a lot of the generating units, even the gas-fired units, either their gas supplies were frozen, or due to fluctuations in the ERCOT system, a lot of those plants failed. And they couldn't be restarted quickly because they did not have the technology that your NOPS plant has.
Thank you.
If you'll permit me to just add one other data point, council member?
Absolutely, please.
I just want to give a data point on the people who operated the NOPS plant. They did not go home. They stayed overnight at NOPS. They slept there, and they worked nonstop to make sure that plant continued to answer the call when called upon to operate. And I just wanted to highlight that, so often, they're overlooked. We think about it in terms of the technology alone, and it's extremely important. But the personnel there sacrificed time and resource and stayed there overnight for a few days to continue to operate that plant as we needed it. Just wanted to highlight that. And that was not specific to NOPS only. That happened at a number of our plants, but I wanted to just highlight that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, any other comments? Okay, seeing none. I thank you to all of the presenters. Of course, thank you to the committee for all being here today. It looks like that completes our agenda. Oh, wait, we do a public comment, right, Aaron?
Yes,
thank you for stopping me. Go ahead, Aaron, on the public comment. My bad.
Right. We just have 3.
Okay, go ahead.
The first comment is from Monique Harden with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. She serves as Assistant Director of Law and Policy, Community Engagement Program Manager. In a local news report, Entergy New Orleans CEO David Ellis called the shutoff of 4 times more power than was needed, which targeted mostly Black neighborhoods on a freezing Mardi Gras night, a quote, computer glitch. This is not an explanation of what caused this Entergy failure. Without a clear explanation, there is no way we can be assured of a solution that prevents an unnecessary blackout from happening again. Perhaps Mr. Ellis does not believe he owes the people of New Orleans who paid for Entergy's computer systems and the IT staff to maintain them an explanation. The Deep South Center for Environmental Justice is concerned about the racial inequity created by Entergy's blackout targeting mostly Black neighborhoods. This racial inequity is exacerbated by the fact that the excess power that was shut off in New Orleans should have been shut off for Entergy Louisiana customers that include large industrial customers. We urge council members to require an independent management audit of Entergy to investigate this and other failures of the company, as well as review all corporate decisions and practices. We recommend the City Council look to the independent management audit required for Hawaii's utility that found $20 million in cost savings and corrective action to improve service. Thank you for your attention. Logan Burke with the Alliance for Affordable Energy. She's a member of the staff.
Can I respond to that? Am I permitted to do that?
Chair Moreno.
Go ahead, Mr. Ellis.
I'd just like to say, I've heard that a number of times now. And, not that my personal feelings matter quite so much here, but I feel personally offended every time I hear someone say that we're targeting disparate neighborhoods. And that has not happened, and that won't happen as long as I continue to operate E&O. I am a product of those types of neighborhoods. All of my children are products of those kinds of neighborhoods. Several of them have attended HBCUs and African-American functions, and their friends are African-American. And I find it deeply offensive. That assertion is deeply offensive to me. I'd love to have a conversation with her and anybody else who asserts that we are targeting Black neighborhoods or people of color. It is just not true. It's not factual, it's made up, and it's convenient, but it's inaccurate.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Aaron?
The second comment is from Logan Burke. Council, as you have seen in a letter I submitted yesterday on behalf of and signed by Entergy Future New Orleans Coalition, we insist on a full independent management audit. Not only do the people of New Orleans deserve the services they are paying for, they deserve for the representatives they have elected to regulate this company that has failed our city countless times. The news that a glitch was the cause of 4 times the load shed required is simply not enough of an answer, nor a solution to ensure that such a thing will not happen again. We understand that this corporation has continued to profit handsomely for its shareholders during the last year, but has not benefited the people it has the monopoly franchise to serve. We have seen what happens when a show cause order is announced and nothing changes, or worse, Entergy threatens or sues or oversteps to accountability. This regulatory body has every right to require an independent look under the hood to ascertain the problems and develop solutions, as other regulators have done. It is time to act. New Orleanians can't afford this dangerous pattern of behavior. Audit Entergy now. Grace Morris with the Sierra Club. She is a paid staff of Sierra Club. However, she is under no obligation nor paid to comment. Council members, last month, the shortest month of the year, you held 2 emergency meetings on Entergy. We are in the situation of high bills, uneconomic polluting power plants, failing infrastructure, and failing service because of years of negligence. Entergy is a $10 billion corporation, and Entergy CEO Leo Denault called 2020 another successful year, in quotes, for the company. The Dentons, your advisors, are the largest law firm in the world by lawyers, 6th by revenue, and have a track record littered with doubling down on polluting energy. The people who are charged with representing the people of New Orleans in this matter are you. New Orleans is ready for a just transition to a renewable energy economy, for green jobs, for electricity that doesn't pollute our neighborhoods, to move forward and to see if Entergy is capable of partnering with the city in a renewable, affordable, livable, and equitable energy future. I ask the council to initiate an independent management audit of Entergy. Councilmember, those are all the comments.
Thank you. And as I mentioned before, I'd already agreed to the audit and emailed back the email that I received from Logan yesterday. So, okay, it appears that now we are completed with our agenda. So unless anyone else has additional comments, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'd like to just, before you adjourn, just thank you for the opportunity to again review the subsequent load shedding events that occurred following the emergency call by MISO, and also the cybersecurity events. And if you're not asking these questions, then there's nobody who would. So we appreciate it. It gives us an opportunity to look at our processes and the way we do things and to improve upon them. We said before, we learn from every storm. And with climate change, these storms are teaching us something different, and we'll continue to improve. So thank you for this time. Sorry about my last comments. They just grade me the wrong way. But again, thank you, council members.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis, for being with us today as well. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
So moved by Councilmember Banks. Can I get a second, please?
Second.
It was seconded by Councilmember Glapion. All in favor? Aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, hearing no nays, it looks like we are adjourned. Thank you all.
Thank you, Council
Everybody wear a
members.
mask.